Welcome, everybody. Hope you've had a great Thursday so far. So thank you so much to all of you who made it here live. I'm so excited to offer our first ever Team Oily Families training webinar with my amazing coach, Michelle Parrish. Michelle and I have been working together for the last 2 years, almost every week. And so she's very familiar with the ins and outs of Young Living and our team culture, and has a fairly good grasp on the type of conflict that we see within our organizations. So I asked her to come and present to you guys because I know that this is a challenge. And it's a challenge that we can learn from and grow from. And it's not, you're not doing anything wrong if you have conflict in your organization. It's completely normal. So she is able to give us some really helpful strategies that we can apply as we continue to grow and learn, and that's what it's all about. So Michelle, thank you so much for being here. I know you're joining us from beautiful Southern California, and I'm in Texas, and I just love that we can connect this way through technology.
It is so wonderful to be able to connect this way and across the country. So thank you to everyone for joining us tonight for this wonderful learning opportunity to be here together. And I hope to have some short discussions at the end. Alyssa demonstrates her commitment to the organization in so many ways. I see it all the time. And for her to make this investment in the group and be able to provide this training and be able to provide an avenue for the group to have conversations on this, I think it's wonderful. And it's a perfect example of her really incredible leadership. I am Michelle Parrish, as she has mentioned. I'm an executive coach and consultant. I work with leading executives and their teams for high performance. That's what it's all about. And much like a sports coach who works on a game, with their players, I'm more or less working with people though on their inner game, right? Sometimes the outer game, but it's really about that inner game, and conflict it definitely falls into that category as well. And as Alyssa said, I've been working with Young Living and Oily Families here for about 2 years now. So I've had the pleasure of getting to know many of you and to be in some of the forums with you, whether it be the symposiums or the convention and some of the other webinars and all. So it's been such a pleasure to get to know the Young Living business. I really enjoy everything that I see and the culture that's here and the way that people interact and learn. And what I see here is a wonderful learning organization where everybody loves to try on new things and be able to interact in new ways. And that's what we're here today, is to learn some new things about conflict and how to make the world essentially a better place, getting it from less pain to more peace. And we're gonna dig in here just shortly. I wanted to let you know I'm gonna present for about 45 minutes. And well, I'm going to leave the video up. I want you to really try to focus on the slides, because the slides have some visual content that I want to almost imprint on your mind and have you remember. That's how some of these key concepts are going to stick. So for some of you who are visual learners, I feel like that's going to really help. And then as we go along, I'll try to make those key points for our more audio learners as well. So with that, are you ready? Let's get set. Let's go. And start to dig in to our content. So our agenda, we're going to start with some questions. I have some tips and tricks for you, as we said in the messaging, and a little formula called the 3 C's to go through when you're thinking through conflict. We're going to end with some time for questions as well. But I don't want you to forget the big agenda here, right? So this is our little agenda overall, what we're covering. But our big agenda really is about reducing stress, making stress go away, right? So if any of you have your bottle of stress away handle handy, please make sure you're using it and putting it on in the background and remembering to use it in those stressful times as well. It's something that does help along the way. So let's get started on some key points, some key messages. The first one is that conflict is inevitable. And as this wonderful Max Lucado quote says, but combat is optional. So I want you to really think about conflict, kind of like death and taxes. It's something that just is part of a life, and we have to learn how to deal with it better. And it's eventually going to come around to us. So what's better is to know that it's going to come, and that we need to be prepared on how to handle it, and be able to deal with it in a way that is something that works for us. So I grew up in a family of 8 kids, by the way. And when I was growing up, we had a lot of fun growing up and playing together and all. But we also naturally had a lot of conflict too. You know, who wore my shirt and who ate my ho-ho, right? So that may date me a little bit, but that gives you an idea of the children growing up, right? You have all these little tiffs. But you manage to get through them into the other side, right? And it's important because you know that on the other side are these wonderful things. So what we always want to think about is that we are going to run into these little conflicts here and there, but what we want to do is handle them with grace and be able to move to a better place. So what's different though when we're talking about the age of the digital age, which is what we're all working in and living in, and all these ways that we're interacting now with, which are through electronics and mediums. I think what's different about it is we don't have, of course, that as much face-to-face interaction. So we don't get to see each other's emotions as much in terms of facial expressions, in terms of body language, and a lot of other things that clue us in as human beings about what's going on in our relationships. And in fact, I think what happens in the digital age is often we resort to working more in just one or two of our worlds, because what we really have is these 3 different worlds. There's the I world, the we world, and the it world. And the I world is all about us. It's our inner thoughts and feelings, and you know, basically how we're thinking of things. And then there's the we world, which is more of our relationships. And here you see the computer, which is, you know, yes, a lot of our relationships are being augmented online, but it is really about people and their interactions. And then we have the it world, which is really more all the other things. It's the data, it's the products, it's the things that we can touch and feel around us, that are important, but we don't want to make it so important that the main relationships that we're having are between the I and the it world. What that does is that kind of takes out the whole personal element and what makes life truly enjoyable, and being able to embrace other people and learn and grow with other people. And so we have to remember that in this digital world, that, you know, that the we part is still a key part of this, and the relationships and how do our relationships work. And so we want to create that resonance, that attuning, or getting in sync with people. And we have to do that even though we may not be right in front of them or face to face. There's a concept called dissonance, and that means when you're out of touch or discordant, and resonance being when you're in tune with somebody. And this is something that we know from the study of neuroscience is when you get that resonance going, all sorts of wonderful things happen. People trust one another, and they can have great conversations and make great things happen. But when dissonance occurs, all sorts of bad things happen. You know, lack of trust and inability to move forward, and things kind of stall, and people get emotionally locked up. So we want to try to reach and stay in that state of resonance, and when we fall off, get back quickly to that better place. I want to share this quote with you that I think is so compelling in what it's trying to tell everyone, and it goes back to the days of Aristotle, when he said that anybody can become angry. That's easy, but to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and the right way, that's not within everybody's power, and it's not easy. So it kind of reminds us that when this thing called conflict, and when we have issues, sometimes we think with somebody else, it may not actually even be about them, that it's really hard to place our anger and our feelings sometimes in the right places, because it's complex. We're complex as human beings. And so, you know that saying about don't take it out on the dog. And I think a lot of times when people are angry, it can come out in different places. And we want to check in with ourselves and be asking ourselves, what's the real reason for this conflict? And can we put the meaning in the right places? Now, here's a list of 10 of the most frequent conflict triggers that we see just in general with people. The first one is being spoken to in a condescending way or with a lack of respect. This one I happened to experience just a couple of weeks ago. I happened to be with a security guard. Thankfully, it wasn't with one of the airline security guards because we know what can happen in that case. But it was one of those things where I felt like someone had treated me rudely, and it was something that I did want to address, and I did so through an appropriate chain of command, and it resulted in actually that person behaving very positive and different with me in the future. And I think it was one of those cases where that person really didn't know how they were coming off, and they didn't know that that could be interpreted as rude, and they had a different agenda, and maybe they were, as Aristotle was saying, kind of taking it out on the wrong place. So, we can take those examples of when we are getting some of these triggers and turn them around, but there's a lot of them, right? So being treated unfairly is another one of them that's embedded in the human condition, that if we feel like we're treated unfairly, all sorts of things happen in our brain that make our red flags go up, and we start to get embroiled in that feeling and what to do about it. Same thing with not being appreciated or not being listened to or feeling heard. The list goes on, right? Somebody taking credit for something that you feel you did, being kept waiting, particularly if you're really busy and need to be somewhere else, right? And having somebody else's work not be up to par with what you're expecting, or feeling criticized or blamed. Unrealistic deadlines tend to be a lot of what makes people feel pressure and stress, and can definitely trigger conflict. And even people who think they know it all, right? So there's these many things that can cause conflict to occur. And this is a normal life. You just even take out the whole idea that we're in this digital world. And when you add the digital world to it, it's actually all these other things that can come up that might create conflict. And so what we want to understand is, what are some of the conflict triggers? And Alyssa and I spent some time offline just brainstorming together. What are some of the common conflict triggers that we see in Young Living? And here's some of them that we came up with that we want to share with you. You might have others that you want to add to the list. By the way, you're welcome to add those and put them in the chat box, and we'll kind of collect those. But here's some that we think the more common ones. Some of it's the Facebook drama, right? So people may say or do things on Facebook that may not feel perfectly appropriate. They might be somewhat toxic in nature, and we know that that can have a spillover effect on the whole group, right? So we try to shut things like that down as soon as we can, because we know the impacts can be very negative. But because people are working at all sorts of hours and playing online at all sorts of hours, with many of these different influences around them, you go back to that Aristotle quote: you never know what's triggering somebody and what's creating some of the dynamics that they're feeling, and that might be overflowing online. So we know that we see some of that, and it's something that we should expect, and we should know how to handle it when we see it. Same thing with the upline. Sometimes there's some feelings of resentment or feelings of not like you're getting what you need from your upline, that type of thing. And that can make one feel like they're working harder than they need to, or many other feelings. And it's one of those things that can, if not addressed, right, create a lot of even inner conflict. So we know there's tools out there, right? Things that can help us deal with all of this better, and we can make requests and deal with it in healthier ways. But we also just need to know that it might be a trigger for us. Same thing with things like strategic placement, right? Kind of a little bit of a controversial area, and somebody gets placed someplace in particular into your organization, and it may or may not be what you were expecting or hoping for. This too can lead to a lot of just feelings that need to perhaps be expressed and be dealt with and worked through. But it is something that's common in this particular business. Another one is the teaching of classes. So in classes, we have all sorts of different teaching styles, and some people want to be able to just take a boilerplate and replicate it, right? So using that duplication philosophy. And others may want to be a little bit more innovative, and just might have different ways of doing their teaching and how they engage others. So we want to keep calm and teach on, and not necessarily get all embroiled in that. We have to have some ways for checking in. And then the other obvious one that exists as well is just personality conflicts in general, right? So not everybody gets along beautifully together, and there's a reason for that. There's an interesting mix of styles and drivers and things as human beings. And some of us are just kind of wired differently, so differently from one another that we commonly will come in conflict with one another. That should be expected too. That's part of the human condition. And I'm going to talk a lot more about this one in a few minutes. So I'm going to hold some thoughts on that. The key thing or concept that I want you to really think about right now is, what is it that triggers you? And know what to do when you get that trigger. So this is a picture of a tornado. So I know you're in Texas, many of you, and you still get the tornadoes. Maybe on the coastal areas you get the tsunamis. Here in California we get the earthquakes, right? But we all learn that we need to prepare for these kinds of things. We need to be ready. We need to have thought about it in advance. How are we going to handle that? You can use that same kind of thinking for conflict, because you know it's inevitable. It may not be frequent. It's not an everyday thing, I hope. But when it occurs, you want to be able to say, I'm ready. I know how to deal with this and how to get started. So here's what I want to do in terms of teaching you things about neuroscience that can be really, really helpful for understanding your own mind, how it works, and in the face of conflict. So here you see what happens when on the brain, essentially, when conflict occurs. In times of low emotion, when you're calm and you're relaxed, everything's working beautifully, right? You can think clearly, everything's as it should be. When we go into these periods of high emotion, whether it's anger or fear, even excitement or love, even the really high positive emotions, what happens is your upper cortex gets disabled. So that thinking part of your brain actually shuts off. And as a result, you don't think as well, because we need that part of our brain to really think well. It's something that we call getting your amygdala tripped. Whenever your amygdala, which is a little walnut-sized organ in your mind, in your brain, gets triggered, it basically sends you into this place where you kind of stop and you become a little bit more what I'll call reptilian, so to speak. It could be because that lower part of the brain starts to kick in versus the upper, and that's our primitive emotional zone. It's the part that's closest to the spinal cord. So you literally, when you have these times in your life where you have a lot of anger or fear or something that pops into your life, your brain literally gets short-circuited. That's what's going on. And we know this kind of thing now more so than ever, because we've been able to study it, having all the tools and more of the knowledge base, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years. So we want to use all of this knowledge to help us in our times of conflict, because we know that this is exactly what is going on in our minds. So with that, here's a tip that I want you to take away from today. That's one that you can remember to do all the time, just like you would if you had a sick child, right? If you knew that your child might have a temperature, a cold or a flu or whatnot, you take their temperature, right, to see how bad is it. And what you can do for yourself is to take your emotional temperature, and that's really kind of stepping back from what's going on and saying, how hot, how red am I? How we'll call it something else. How cloudy is your glass? Okay, another way to think of it. So when your glass is really cloudy, you can't think very clearly. And again, you have that upper part of your brain just kind of shut off. The more that you can calm yourself down, the more that you can relax and give yourself a little time to let everything settle and come back to that normal state, the more that you have a clear head, and the better that you can proceed in ways that are creative and that really leverage all the best that you have to offer, as to that more primitive reptilian way that you would react under high stress when your amygdala is tripped. So that's a point that I want you to really keep in mind, is taking your temperature and being able to calm down in those times where there is something that's triggering you. The other one that takes a little bit more time to learn, but is really well worth it, is to learn some of the tools to help kind of analyze what's going on in your conflict situations, particularly in the cases, remember how I said, where there might be a personality that you're not getting along with particularly well. These personality styles or differences occur all the time. And if you can understand it better, if you can rationalize it better, it's so much easier to deal with it than if you just think of it as an impossible situation or an impossible person. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of baseline, I would say, training in this area, because I want you to at least have enough of a sense of it. You can say, okay, maybe it's not just the other person or even just me, but maybe it's how we come together. And some of you may be familiar with something called the DISC. It's one of those personality profiles of sorts. So I know a lot of you have done the color analysis or personalysis and know, like, if you're a red personality or one of the different colors and how you come across. And the DISC is one that we use often for helping people communicate better. And the reason why is because it helps them see how different we really can be in our outward behavioral styles. And when you have styles that are really opposite from one another, in certain areas, like high Ds or high conductor types being very different sometimes than high S or supported types, just as an example, what you'll see is there can be definitely conflicts that occur because these different styles communicate in different ways, and they have different needs and different ways of expressing themselves. And so it's to be expected that these conflicts are going to occur. And the less that you invest in kind of understanding those differences, the more that they're likely to occur. The more that you can understand how different a person is and why, and that's just how they're wired, the more it's easy to accept that and move on. Similarly with things called attitudes. So these are 6 different styles that we see in human beings, and it's been studied really for over 100 years now. And they're given these labels, which I'll explain really quickly, but they're basic attitudes or drivers in people. And typically your top 2 will drive how you behave. It's the why you behave. And so we know high theoreticals are really all about understanding and discovering the truth, and high utilitarians are about a return on their investment, whether it's their time or their energy or their money. The high aesthetics really want to understand and appreciate form and harmony and beauty around them. So they're really all about creating a sense of harmony. And high socials really want to help other people. That's what they're here to do in life. Individualistic people, those are ones that really want the highest position, and they want to be in positions of power. They feel like they're ready for that. They need that. They want that. And high traditionals, they are more about following a certain system of living for life, whether it's religious in nature, or maybe they're a yogi or a vegan or something along those lines. And what we find, and I know I've gone through this very quickly and we literally could spend hours going through it, I simply want to make the point that if you look and know that time and time again over the years, you'd be able to study and show that people are driven by these different things. When the motivator is opposite or very different from another person's, you're likely at some point to run into conflicts with that person. It's part of that human nature and is to be expected. And the more that we can learn and understand the different styles and appreciate them, and appreciate that we have to have the whole mix in our teams and in our families and in our and everything else that we do, the more that we can avoid some of that conflict by simply looking at it and saying people are people and this is how they are. Now, that might seem a little bit all complicated, and it does take time to learn, but something that's not very complicated, and I hope you've all been learning, and I think you have, is emojis. So one of the tricks that I wanted to share with you from today is that these little emojis, when used, can really help diffuse some of the conflict that can occur and get people on the right track in terms of what you're intending when you're saying things in the digital world. So in fact, I think that there's so many emojis now that we almost need to have, instead of a dictionary, we need a Pictionary, right? Because there's so many different ones that we can choose from, and they all have these slight variations, but all of them are fun, right? In some way, and that they tend to make light of our emotions as human beings, and that we want to be able to express ourselves through those emotions, and that's harder to do in the digital world, right? So using the emojis can really bring you to a place of better understanding of where that person is. So if you can use them to express yourself, whether it's in your text messages or online, it really does help a lot. I'll give you an example from my own life. I had a client who reached out over the weekend with a text message, and I could tell just he was a little bit stressed out, and that he was worried about some feedback that he was getting from somebody else. And then when I finally saw the turn in him is when I got another note and it had this smiley emoji on it, I know he had made the emotional turn and he was in a better place. And you know, it seems like the guys don't use them as much as the women, but you know, it is a wonderful way to express yourself and to show how you're doing, and to avoid having people misunderstand you. Another thing that I want to go through with you is something that you can embrace and hopefully use in those times of conflict is what I call the 3C model. And here's how it goes. It's call it, calm it, or change it. And change it, really. And let me tell you a little bit more about what that is. When you call it, what you're trying to describe what kind of conflict is ensuing, okay? You're kind of trying to characterize it a bit and say what it is. So a blunder is something that is just kind of somebody made a little slip, a mistake, and it's something really that hopefully you can forgive, forget, move on. It's minor. A blowover is something that maybe you need to give it some time, right? Sometimes we just need time to process our emotions and let things settle. And there's nothing wrong with that, to just do nothing for a while you allow that process to happen. So again, it's that calming. It's that you had a trip to amygdala. You're going into this more primitive zone. You want to have time to come back to your whole person, when that's rational and thinking and calm and contemplative, right? So we need that time sometimes to come to a better place. I can think of an example even from my own life in the last year, where I had a very good friend, an amazing friend, who we had gotten into something where it was like really the first time we had an issue, and it was such a worry for me because we were such a wonderful friend. And what we ended up doing with this conflict is we literally just gave it some time to blow over. We gave each other a little space for a while, and after that came back to the table, both being able to come with a much better response, and we're able to quickly move through it. So you don't always have to deal with conflict in the moment. Sometimes you want to give it that time and let it blow over. However, okay, I also want to let you know, I do think that there's showstoppers out there too. These are the times where, you know, we know that something is really not right with a person and your relationship with them. It may be that they're toxic in general, or toxic towards you, or there's some kind of major issue at play. And sometimes, and while I think it's rare, you might want to actually just let go of the relationship. I don't recommend it. I'd keep that to, 5 or less, keep it to one hand or less of the people in your life. But at the same time, realizing that maybe all of the relationships weren't meant to be. Very strategically, there may be one that you set aside and just say that doesn't work for you, and that's okay, and move on from there. The last one type of conflict that I wanted to share with you that is distinctly different, I think, is it's not the conflict between you and other people, it's the inner conflict. Okay, that's when you're conflicted and you can feel it, that you're struggling with something inside and you're not really able to make peace with it yet, but perhaps through some additional mind shift and some different ways of thinking it, you can move it to a different place where you can feel better. I actually had one of these last night, a little bit of inner conflict going on. I had to work through it. One of my favorite ways, by the way, of working through these internal conflicts, which are, again, not necessarily about the other people in your world and the outside world, it's more about what you're grappling with and your values and how things connect for you, is to use some inspirational material or something that helps pull you out of that or give you perspective. My favorite one, by the way, is it's a book by Wayne Dyer, who is a favorite author of mine. It's called The 10 Secrets for Success and Inner Peace. And I find that a lot of times if I'm struggling with something and I go just read a couple pages of this, it puts me in a whole different place and I'm able to just think about things differently. There's one of the laws, or one of the secrets that he presents is that there's no justified resentments. And that might sound like a funny concept of, like, oh, you should be able to resent something, right? And if you shift your thinking about it and see that maybe you can let go of that too. Maybe there's other ways to think about it. That mindset shift can often be what gets you out of that place of inner conflict and into a more peaceful, more calm state where you feel better about the world. Now, there's a lot of other things we can do, by the way, to calm it. Remember, there's the call it and then the calm it, I think the second step. So we can do reading and all these other things, but one of the best things that helps a lot, particularly for women, is to have a conversation with another woman. It's an amazing thing that we've learned that I mean, this is something we traditionally know, right? That having these conversations with each other can often make us feel better. But there's actually a science to it as well, that, that talk and that connection amongst women in particular releases oxytocin in the brain, and it brings us to a calmer place. So just taking the time out to sometimes talk things through with a friend, or somebody else that you really trust and admire their ability to kind of give good advice, is another way to calm down. So is music. So is getting out in nature, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can just remember whatever works best for us. Find that way that works best for you to calm down. And then the last thing, and this is really about moving from managing conflict to leading conflict, leading through conflict and into changing it, is decide how you want things to be different. How do you want to be? Do you want to be different in these times of conflict? Do you want to be somehow the bigger person, the person who is dealing with it more gracefully? So you want to ask yourself, what standards am I going to hold? Who do I want to be? And maybe you do want to get some help with this conflict, because it can often help to get another perspective, one that enables us to see things differently and be differently as a result. There's a wonderful quote from Ronald Reagan that peace isn't the absence of conflict, but it's the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. So, we should expect, again, that we will have that conflict. That conflict is inevitable, but we can choose to do it peacefully. And so that's the main message that I wanted to be able to leave you here with today, is this idea that, you can bring more peace to the world by how you respond to the conflict, whether it's the external conflicts that are around you or the internal conflicts that are inside. And whether it's in the physical world that you can touch and feel around you, or if it's the world that is online that tends to have, that harder time getting in touch with their emotions. But it's how you deal with it that matters the most. And with that, I just wanted to say, I'm wishing you that you do get that better peace. And also wanted to, as a last message, just say thank you again to Alyssa for sponsoring this training and being able to provide something to the group to help the group move through its times of conflict and move to that better place. And at this point, what I'd love to do is be able to take some questions and comments from the chat. I know we kind of moved through some of this material quickly, and what's important is that we're able to share and learn together and take some time out to advance it further as a group. So I'm going to pull up our chat and see if anybody has any questions. What I see, by the way, is lots of wonderful comments, and some people, and lots of emojis too, which is great to see. Let's see. And so lots of comments about this makes sense, and use your oils. Of course, we want to remember to use our oils, and to tame our red, right? Tame that yellow. I'm sharing some of the comments here. Thankful that oils can get to my amygdala. And yes, it is. I heard Gary talking one day about the way that the oils work with the brain, that they are able to penetrate really through the blood and into the brain and make a difference for us, that they really do have that type of effect. On the disc, there's some questions, by the way, get me some disc, love the disc. These are tools, by the way, that if you're interested in learning and using, you can just send me a message and I'm happy to share more with you. And if you'd like to take the assessments, make that available to you. Alyssa sharing that she's a high individualistic and utilitarian. And something else that I wanted to share with you, by the way, regarding those key motivators, is that we find often that if there's a group of high individualistics where there's many of them kind of working together, that circumstance can lead to a lot of conflict, simply because those people are used to doing things in a way that they see fit. They like to be in leadership and charge, and so you kind of get a little bit of that. That there's lots of leaders, lots of chiefs and fewer Indians, and so that conflict is natural in those cases. We see that quite a bit. And somebody's also sharing that they saw that they added a new emoji today called thankful on Facebook. That's a good one. And somebody said that Zoom needs, Alyssa said Zoom needs some emojis. I agree, other than in the chat box. Okay, so I see lots of good comments, and that some people need to get some sleep. Let's see. More about oxytocin. Any questions though? I see lots of wonderful comments. I'm wondering if there's any questions in the group that anybody'd like to pose.
Michelle, keep scrolling. There's some questions there.
Okay, let's see. I don't see that. You know what, Alyssa, do you mind pointing them out? Because I don't see them on here.
Oh, okay. For me, they're all the way at the very bottom.
Mm.
So I was asking personally, how do you see a woman's cycle, time of the month, as a factor in conflict? Like, do you think that's a real issue? Does it affect our brain?
Yes, I think it absolutely does. I think that the chemical changes that we go through monthly send us into different places, right? And so your hormones are changing. That affects how your mind is thinking. And I think it's one that we know historically is an issue for women, right? That and there's times in our cycle that we get more emotional is what it is. And so if you're getting more emotional, it's actually you're more likely to get into the conflict. Again, it's that whole idea that you're kind of cutting off that upper part of the brain where you're able to think more clearly. And so while I haven't seen anything that kind of outlines it all with perfect clarity, I think it's just a known fact that absolutely it factors into. And therefore, we want to think of it when you think about the calling it. A lot of those types of things, we think, let that type of thing be the blow over, right? Just give it a little time and let it blow over. It's going to happen. You don't need to do anything other than that. Let it be.
Okay. So Amanda, I know this is probably a common observation within our team. Amanda's very yellow, which in DISC would be, hold on, no, S or C. And so she has trouble relating to the reds and the stronger personalities herself, which would be me. So what kind of wisdom can you share with those personality types that are not quite as bold and strong for them to relate better to the stronger personality types and have less conflict?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and obviously one that's that goes on day in and day out. So when you're one of these personality types that's a little bit more mellow and kind of calm and reserved, and you have the more dominant types around you, I think the thing to remember there is that this is how these people are expressing themselves, that they have this need to do that, right? And it's really about acceptance. It's really about accepting that is how they're wired. And while they can learn how to interact sometimes differently with those who are more the more steady types, or the ones that are a little bit more calm and reserved. It's one of those things where just the acceptance of it can go a long way. And you might be able to tell them more about, when you're interacting with me, here's my preferences, right? So that whole idea of recognizing that it's a style difference and sharing what your preferences are, that's what the tools also help us do, is outline for the different styles. How does one want to be spoken to? What are the things to keep in mind? And the more that we know each other's styles and can adapt to each other's styles, the better that we can do. So it is really about trying to provide to each other more of what each other needs. And the best way to do that is by sharing, is by saying, what I need more from you is this, right? Or my request is this, and see if that person can deliver.
Just opening up that conversation, I think, is probably so hard for women that aren't used to a corporate environment. They haven't run a business before. They're at home with their kids all day. So it's hard to take that step and be bold and what you said, ask for what you need. But I think that would help so many of us if we would just talk about it more.
Yeah, learning to make a request. It's really about giving feedback, right? And being able to give somebody else feedback in a meaningful way that they can actually use it and do something with it, that's a skill. And it takes time, right, to develop that. So what I always tell people is to challenge yourself to give more feedback, right? To do it in ways that are constructive. And you'd be surprised how, when you make that request, when you do this, I feel, so my request is, could you do this? People are usually happy to oblige, but they just don't know, right? And they can't fix what they don't know.
Yeah, so true. Okay, let me grab another question. There's some good ones. How do aesthetic socials better connect or relate to the high individualistic utilitarian types, which
Yeah.
me. Are you
Ah.
guys having conflict with me that I don't know about?
Well, yes. So those high aesthetics, right? And high socials, like they're about harmony and they're about they want to do good in the world, and that's what they're wired to do, right? That's what their why here on earth. And so I think when they're interacting with the people who are high individualistics and need to, or high utilitarians and need to drive a certain way, what you need to do is it does really go back to acceptance and then also requesting. So the whole idea of you can't change somebody's motivators and driver. You can't even
No.
even if you wanted to and worked day and night, you're not going to change that about them. It's hardwired in. Okay. So that's why you have to accept it and more say that's their role in life and mine is this, right? And we, maybe we were put here to do different things, and if I can respect what you need to do, maybe you can respect better what I need to do with my time and money and whatnot, right? So it is a matter of just knowing that we are different in those ways and that we're going to bring different things to the table, and you need the whole mix, right? The world can't survive just based on one. We need them all.
I love that. That's true. Okay, Steph wants to know, as leaders, 'cause everybody here has, a team that's reached at least silver or beyond. So we're all leaders. What should we do when we know someone on our team is pissed off at us, but doesn't have the emotional maturity to discuss it and deal with it? Do we let it go and leave that in their court, or should we pursue to have resolution?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great question, and I do think it happens all the time. First of all, they may not really be ticked at you, right? It could be that they're ticked at something else. It goes back to that Aristotle quote. So, I mean, you have to first understand, is it something that's going on for them and maybe it's just coming off that way to you, but it really doesn't have anything to do with you? And you wouldn't know. I'd give it a little time on things like that. If it's persistent, right? If you notice and you watch it and you're like, that really does seem like it's more about me than it is something else that's going on, or they're treating me differently. That's when I think it's, and you've given it sufficient time, it's time to then stop and try to have that conversation, right? And invest in the relationship, right? So it goes back to that whole idea that online we're missing a lot of them, particularly if it's something that's going on online, we're missing a lot of the emotions and the things that help us understand whether or not we're in true resonance. So you might need to have that face-to-face meeting, right? Or at minimum a telephonic conversation to get through something like that, because it's too hard to do online.
Yeah, there's no emotion there.
Right. There's no way to really tell. So it's a more of a sit down, right, over coffee and have a conversation for a relationship. So I tell people, there's three kinds of conversations that we have. They're conversations for action, which is really about what do we need to get done and just moving through our day, making things happen. And then there's conversations for a relationship, which are really about just sitting down and being able to talk about how things are going between you. And then there's conversations for possibility, which is what do you want to create? What's something that if we really look and do things differently, we might make happen, right? So allowing for that space too. But that middle one about conversations for relationship, that's sitting down and just talking, how's it going between us and what can we do to make it better? And how are you feeling? And is there anything I can do to help, right? And it's just opening it up to those kinds of questions. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do always, but if somebody's got to be the bigger person and make the first move, and that goes back to one of those three questions, right? I mean, can you be that person that makes the first move in that positive direction? Because often it's that very step that makes all the difference, that somebody was willing to extend themselves and be different about it. I can tell you, even for me, that's another one where I think recently I had a case with one of my sisters, and there was where it was things were not going well for a little bit, but the relationship meant to me too much to just set it aside, right? It was like, okay, I'm just gonna do what I can to try to start the conversation again so we can get going, because it sometimes just takes a little bit of letting them know you care enough to come back to the table and have a discussion on it.
I'm hearing that recurring theme. It has to be about open communication. Um, so there is the next question to me. I'm going to grab it because it makes sense with this conversation. What if you've tried to reach out to that person and they won't reciprocate? Do you let it go? What do you do?
Yeah, I would give it time because maybe they're not ready, right? So maybe in their world they're choosing the option to allow more time for their mind to get clear, for their glass to be clear, right, versus cloudy. And if they've got a lot of motion going still on, they're not ready, and that means that it wouldn't be good for you to interact anyways, right? Because they would be in this more highly emotionally charged space. So it really, you have to look at it as you both have to be ready to come to the table, and testing for that is good, but forcing one to come earlier than they may be ready for is not as much of the recipe for success. So allow for that. Each person needs more different times to process and come to the table differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another really interesting topic that came up that I haven't thought about this, but when there's an age difference between people on a team, so someone younger who's having a conflict with someone that's older than them, that's a tough one. So what would you say to that type of situation?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Is, by the way, one that I've seen recently. Particularly, by the way, if you think about to our older generation and then even some of the young millennials and the differences, like there's a lot of articles and even training these days because so many of the millennials have come into the workforce and they see the world so differently. And so there are these differences in the ages that we need to account for, that sometimes it's a philosophy or kind of underlying belief system that's different. So the key to that one, I think, is always the listening and being able to understand that maybe another person just sees it way differently based on how they grew up, and they grew up in a different time period, and it is about being willing to hear their side and trust that maybe they see something differently, or somehow the world is different for them. They just exist in a different world, and that you need to take that into account in how you relate to them. So we were having this conversation the other day, just laughing. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and we were talking about, she kind of, there was a, and when we grew up, you just kind of listened to your parents. You didn't question them as much, right? And then today's age, the kids, that's the norm. They question everything, and they don't take it for granted that it's just okay. That's the parent, and we should do that way. And for some reason, it was actually my sister who said that to me. It made me realize, right, that's the world they live in. It's so different from how we grew up. We have to take that into account and deal with them or interact with them in new ways. They are going to challenge. They are going to be a lot more headstrong in their ways because that's the norm in their groups. So age differences, I think, are real sometimes, and sometimes it's acceptance, but sometimes it's also just learning to understand how that person thinks about things, and you do that through inquiry.
Okay. There's a lot of questions. Let me grab another one here. What would you do about someone who takes everything personally? They're not easily coachable because they take every suggestion as criticism instead of constructive criticism. So yeah, I guess what's a good way to help someone see that you're really trying to offer help, but they're taking it so personally and they feel like you're saying they're doing something wrong? I've seen this happen so many times.
Yes. Yeah, I do think that goes on often. So not everybody, by the way, is good at accepting feedback. So yeah, there are some people that I think are particularly frustrated or defensive when they get feedback of any sort, and it may not be the way you're giving it, but others. And so those are the cases where I feel like you do need to keep trying, but allow for time in between. I've also seen where people will get feedback, and if it just lands at the right time, the right way, all of a sudden they're able to move forward in a new way. And so I have this philosophy, which is never give up. You keep trying, but don't make it so concentrated that they are frustrated by it. You might need to wait a week or a month or come back to the table when they're in a different place and they're ready to absorb it. It's about their readiness, and what's happening is they're just not ready, and you can't change that.
Okay. So I have an anonymous question to ask. So this member, it has people on her team who've noticed that her upline treats her differently than the other members on the team on Facebook. And it's been noticed because on Facebook there's a record of everything. So it's been noticed by other people that she's being treated differently. What would you say to her? That's tricky. That all goes back to digital age stuff. Yeah. In the real world, we wouldn't really see that, but we see it on Facebook because it's right there in front of us.
Right. So this is a perfect example of one that needs to move from online to offline. Right. So the trying to have a conversation about it online, I don't think is going to work because you're missing all of the body language, the emotions, all the things that you need to achieve that resonant state. So it's clearly a relationship that has dissonance, right? And we don't know why. We don't know what's all causing it or what the issue is for that person, but we know it's consistent. And when we take it offline, and let's say you can't just go have coffee, but even if you have a telephone conversation, at least in that you can still hear a lot more of the intonations and ask some questions. So, hey, I've noticed that, when we're having the conversations on Facebook, it seems like maybe you have, maybe there's something that I'm doing that's frustrating to you. You can always put it back on yourself and see how they respond, because it's easier for them, quite frankly, to respond to that. Maybe there is something they'll say, well, when you do this, this is what happens for me, right? And allowing them the opportunity to give you feedback, that's you being the bigger person and taking the first step. Maybe it's not about you, but maybe from their perspective, it is. So allowing them to share their perspective and get through it is really part of that journey. And usually because you've kind of called it out or brought it to the table, I mean, just even taking that step will usually reduce it a lot, because now they're more aware of it. They may not be aware at all that they're doing that. It might be a reaction that's occurring that's completely unconscious.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just want to throw a quick tip out for my team, real quick. I've been using the Marco Polo app. Michelle, it's pretty new, but it's so fun because it's so much more real. It's not just text. It's like, here I am with no makeup on this morning, making my tea, talking to my team. It just feels so real. And so it eliminates that Facebook tension that there sometimes can be. So anyway, I just want to throw that out for my team. If you guys want to try Marco Polo, it'd be a cool way to make your team feel more loved on. So
what does the app do, Alyssa?
So it's like a walkie-talkie back and forth, but with video, and it's instant. So it's like instant gratification. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Very nice. Yeah, I love the new apps and being able to try them all out and what they can do. It's amazing what's out there.
Kara, it's Marco Polo app. You have to download it, and then you have to connect with your contacts. And it's just a quick, fun way to connect with your team. I know, you guys are gonna blow up my Marco Polo, Allison. That's okay. It's fun. I like getting to see my team and getting to know you guys better, because you're my people. I know I missed some questions. Megan had a really good question. If you're still here, Megan, you can retype it. I can't figure out how to scroll up. So kind of stuck there. But I think it was about feeling someone under you feeling like you're not doing enough for them, but you feel like you are. And I've had this happen to me. I've been told that I don't do enough for my team, and it's hurtful. So what would you say to that, Michelle, when you feel like you're doing stuff for them and they feel like you're not doing enough?
Well, to me, this one kind of comes down to a philosophy difference, right? So in some circles, right, in the network marketing and all, there's this concept of that, yes, you're all individual business builders and you're supposed to be taking the initiative and doing really everything on your own and just really asking for help occasionally, right, on a very specific thing, that it's not up to the upline to hold your hand through the process, right, as much as it is to just support when there is a question or something that that they can actively do that just by going out and understanding how somebody else is doing it, for example. So I think it may come down to this philosophy is this isn't necessarily a manager employee relationship or some other kind of relationship where there's more dependency, that you're all independents and the whole system is set up to be where you're operating from your own motivation and drive. So to me, it feels like if somebody's frustrated because they're not getting enough help and they're it may be that their expectations are not in line with what the business philosophy is. And just having that more foundational discussion, I think could be helpful. But also perhaps they need to be more clear, like with the help that they need, just expressing it, right? So maybe they're not communicating it clearly, and that's why the person's unable to give them what they need. So this is another one to me where taking the conversation offline, whether it's telephonic, or if you can meet in a cafe and have coffee and all, can do a lot to bust through what is the persistent kind of conflict and issues to bring it to a new place, because you're able to see and ask questions and just dive deeper. Some things take time to work out and you need that kind of space, and trying to do it too quickly or in too efficient of a manner through a couple of whether it's text messages or things like that, it's just not enough. You got to be willing to invest in the relationship, not necessarily do everything for them, but still be willing to invest in the relationship.
Yeah, the philosophy difference, I think you just hit the nail on the head with that. That's what it comes down to, for sure.
Yeah. Let's see.
Any other last minute questions before we wrap it up tonight? This has been some really good discussion.
Yeah. I really appreciate all the comments. I mean, it's great to even go back and see, and my apologies for not being able to see all of them. It's like I can't, they're not all on the page. And so I do hope that we got to the bulk of them. And I'm just seeing if there's any last minute things that are on there that we want to address. Well, maybe we can kind of summarize these offline, but I do want to mention as we wrap up, it's if you have ongoing questions or things that you want to discuss more, please reach out. There is also trying to go back and show you here regarding the other ways to connect even with me. I do a lot of the I do a newsletter, and there's Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and simply email or phone calls and all of that, ways to reach out. So please feel free to reach out with any added questions and stay in touch. We look forward to it.
Yeah, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you to everybody who was here tonight on a weeknight. I know that's difficult. So.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Yes, absolutely. Good night, everyone. Loving all the comments. They're so fun to read. See you on Marco Polo. Bye, guys.
Bye.